It was not during a grand ceremony, nor in front of the world's cameras. The most moving decision of Leo XIV's pontificate happened in silence, like everything that truly matters. There were no crowds, only the sound of distant bells and the wind sweeping through the silent courtyards of the Vatican. And it was there, on that gray morning, that the Pope uttered a phrase that would change everything. The future of the Church needs a heart that knows how to recognize God on the outskirts of the soul. And that heart is in Jean-Marc Aveline. For many, it was a surprise. For others, a prophetic gesture. Jean-Marc Aveline was not the most mentioned name in the halls of power. He was not the most known face in the news, but for those who knew him, his selection was not only right, it was necessary. He always walked among the invisible. He was found more often in the alleys of Marseille than in the golden halls of Rome. He never sought applause but listened as one who carries the secret of human suffering in his ear. Aveline knew where pain hid and therefore knew where grace could bloom. The Pope's decision was clear. He entrusted Jean-Marc Aveline with the mission of being the guardian of spiritual listening for the modern world, not as a position, but as a vocation. In Leo XIV's words, Jean was not chosen for what he knows, but for what he lets God do in the silence of his heart. Immediately, a new atmosphere spread among the faithful. It was as if Aveline's appointment was less a promotion and more a reminder. A reminder that spiritual authority does not come from prestige, but from humility. That true leadership is not on high pulpits, but in hands extended silently. Jean-Marc Aveline always believed the Church's mission is not to convince, but to console. And now, with Leo XIV's public recognition, this vision gained not only legitimacy but transformative power. Aveline's own reaction was as surprising as the appointment. He did not speak. He did not celebrate. He only wrote a short public note. I accept this calling with fear and trembling. May I never be an obstacle to God's tenderness. That phrase traveled the world like a prayer. Religious and lay people began to share their stories with him. Not stories of spectacular miracles, but of small gestures that had changed lives. A silent visit to a hospital, a wordless embrace, a confession heard through tears. Jean-Marc did not move crowds, he touched individuals, one by one. And that was what the Pope saw. Leadership measured not in numbers, but in depth. By placing Jean-Marc Aveline at the center of a new phase in the Church's mission, Leo XIV did more than honor a man. He pointed a way, a new way of being Church. Less institutional, more incarnate, less worried about rules, more committed to care. The impact of the decision was profound. Dioceses began revisiting their priorities. Seminaries started reformulating their curricula. The clergy, once so focused on management, began to ask themselves, whom are we serving? Because Aveline's choice was not just ecclesial, it was evangelical. It was a reminder to all of us that faith is not made of strategies but presence, that the Church will only be relevant if it can return to listening to the real pains of real people. And Jean, with his simple and radical story, made that visible, made it possible. He was the symbol of a new spiritual dawn where the shepherd does not shout from the mountaintop but walks alongside the sheep. And so, quietly, Leo XIV's decision spread like dawn light over cold lands. When news of Leo XIV's decision began circulating through cloisters and monasteries across Europe, many still did not understand what it meant. But within hours, something moved in Rome, Paris, Dakar, Buenos Aires, Hanoi. The same whisper repeated, the Spirit has begun to blow again. It was not just an appointment, it was a gesture that, by its delicacy, said more than 1,000 speeches. By choosing Jean-Marc Aveline, Leo XIV was telling the world that the time of haste and spiritual superficiality must give way to the time of care. He publicly acknowledged that the Church would no longer survive trying to compete with the voices of the world. It would only survive if it returned to listen to the whispers of God. Jean-Marc Aveline, the son of the margins, was the unexpected name restoring the Church's axis, and not because he had answers, but because he knew how to stay with those who ask. And that detail made all the difference. Aveline's figure spread like an icon of humility. In Franciscan communities in Latin America, in forgotten parishes of Asia, in exhausted urban centers of Europe, his image began to be reproduced not as a hero, but as a mirror. A man of flesh and prayer, who did not flee doubt, who did not hide silence, who did not mask pain. Asterisk on social media, which rarely moves over spiritual topics. Aveline's name quickly rose among the most talked about subjects. Not because of scandals, but because of a video in which he simply appears holding the hand of a terminally ill elderly woman and whispering a prayer. The video went viral. The gesture silenced, because that was what people were looking for. Gestures that don't explain, but reveal. Leo XIV's decision was received in many regions as a new Pentecost, not because of tongues of fire or spectacular miracles, but because, finally, one could see in a high position in the Church someone who breathed the Spirit naturally. Someone who was not afraid to say, I don't know, when necessary. Someone who, before teaching, listened. Several dioceses around the world began to rethink their priorities. Instead of major bureaucratic reforms, small communities started to form around listening. Aveline, until then known as the cardinal of listening, was now becoming the archetype of a church that lets God speak before wanting to speak for him. At Catholic universities, theology students started study groups about his spirituality. In monasteries, his writings began to be read alongside Teresa of Avila, Henry Nouwen, and Charles de Foucauld. In schools, catechists began proposing activities based on his phrases, such as, "The mission is not to convert, it is to be present," and "Presence, when true, converts by itself." But the deepest impact came from where it was least expected. The youth, entire generations who grew up seeing faith as cold or distant, began to approach Aveline's messages like rediscovering a forgotten memory. Because he did not speak about rules, he spoke about reconciliation. He did not shout about doctrines, he whispered about humanity. And so, a new question began to echo in retreats, meetings, vigils. What if the future of the church is as simple as sitting beside those who suffer? That phrase, said by Aveline in a nearly anonymous homily years ago, now became a motto for prayer groups, base communities, and even spiritual renewal movements seeking to return to the essence of the gospel at the heart of the church. In the depths of the world, Leo XIV's choice began to germinate, and it spread not as news, but as prophecy. Because prophecy is not about predicting the future. It is about seeing what the present is silently shouting. And in that now heard silence, the church was rediscovering its path. That morning, the bells of St. Peter's Basilica rang as always. The Roman sky showed its usual light, and the Swiss guards, with their spears raised, kept the unshakable rhythm of the centuries. But inside the white marble corridors and thick shadows, something had changed. It was not visible to the eyes. It was almost imperceptible, like a whisper inside an empty cathedral. But those with eyes trained for the invisible perceived. The spirit had passed by. Leo XIV's decision regarding Jean-Marc Aveline was not only discussed in world newspapers, universities, poor communities, or the most remote pulpits. It shook the very soul of the Roman Curia. And it shook not like a storm, but like a prayer that settles in the heart without asking permission. The first reaction was silence. There were no fiery speeches or official statements, only looks exchanged between experienced cardinals and young secretaries. Some surprised, others moved, and many deeply touched, not by the power of the decision, but by its spiritual courage. Because the Vatican, a place of solid tradition and often resistance to change, knew Aveline. It knew his discreet path. It knew his refusal to participate in power games. It knew his faithfulness to the essential, to prayer, to the other, to the word. And for that reason, it also knew how much his choice said more about the Pope than about Jean-Marc himself. Leo XIV was not merely promoting a name, he was restoring an axis. He was not seeking administrative efficiency. He sought witness. And this gesture, from someone who dares to prefer the light of a candle to the efficiency of a spotlight, began to touch those around him as well within the congregations. In the offices of the Secretariat of State, in the rooms where doctrinal texts are reviewed, there was a gentle upheaval. Religious staff members, monsignors, and prelates began to ask themselves, has the time come to listen more than speak? And this question, for an institution marked by the voice, was revolutionary. In the days that followed, discreet reports circulated within the walls of the Vatican. A secretary abandoned a report to pray silently before the Blessed Sacrament for hours, moved by Aveline's homily broadcast the previous morning. A veteran cardinal, known as a skeptic, was seen handing a highlighted copy of Fraternity and Mysticism, a book by Jean-Marc, to a newly arrived seminarian. At the morning masses in the Pauline Chapel, the presence of bishops and theologians increased, not out of obligation but out of desire. They wanted to listen to the Spirit. They wanted to participate in the same silence that was now becoming strength. And the most impressive movement began inside the more technical congregations. The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, often associated with rigidity, began to propose studies on the theology of listening. Inspired by Aveline's homilies, the Congregation for Bishops resumed old synodal consultation processes, shelved for decades, inspired by the pastoral style of the newly chosen. It was not a structural reform, but a reform of atmosphere, as if the air were different, lighter, more breathable, more full of God. And Leo XIV, in his usual discretion, did not publicly comment on his decision. But he was seen, as reported by several prelates, entering the Basilica of St. John Lateran alone, kneeling for long minutes before the altar. He said nothing, he smiled not, he simply remained there, like one who knows that an inspired decision does not need to be defended, only sustained by prayer within the walls of the Vatican. Many began to understand that it was not just about Aveline, it was about a direction, a return to what matters, a courage that, when truth generates peace instead of resistance. Aveline's symbolic presence began to be felt also in the corridors. Portraits with his profile image, looking humbly at the ground, began to appear in libraries. One of his phrases was carved into an inner wall of the Congregation for the Evangelization. To evangelize is not to cast truths into the abyss. It is to sit at the edge of the world and listen to its groans. This simple phrase became the unofficial motto of a new current beginning to sprout inside the Curia. The current of those who believe that the Church's strength is not in the noise it makes, but in the listening it offers. And thus, Leo XIV's gesture began to be studied as a spiritual event, not merely administrative, like one who, throwing a stone into the lake of history, does not provoke uproar but infinite circles that touch even the most forgotten shores, because the future of the Church, right then and there, seemed less distant. It had already begun, in the heart of a silent pope, in the witness of a pastor from Marseille, and in the sacred silence now echoing through the corridors of Rome. It was not in the newspapers, nor on religious news sites, not in interviews or conferences. The news of Jean-Marc Aveline's choice traveled by other paths. It crossed the planet by the wind of hope, through the veins of silent prayer, through the tearful eyes of forgotten missionaries, through the calloused hands of priests who never had a voice, but always had faith, on a village in sub-Saharan Africa, where the chapel is made of clay and the altar is a clean tree trunk. The local priest gathered his community at dusk. He couldn't exactly explain what had happened in the Vatican, but he knew something had changed. He simply said, "The Holy Father chose one of ours, someone who loves like we love, who prays like we pray." And there, under a starry sky without electricity, a mass was celebrated in thanksgiving for someone none of them would ever meet in person, but whom all already feel as a brother in Latin America, in a Lima favela. Nuns from a local congregation paused their activities for the moment. They sat silently with the children they cared for. One of them read, moved, a passage from a pastoral letter written by Aveline in Marseille. "There is no periphery for God. Every place where a heart beats is the center of love." The children, without fully understanding, applauded, and one of them said, "That priest talks just like my grandmother." In India, at a school for girls run by a small congregation of nuns, the news arrived like a breeze. The Mother Superior, who had once been to Marseille for a conference, told the younger sisters about Aveline, how he refused prestigious positions, how he washed the feet of the poor without cameras or ceremony, how he walked slowly because he knew God walks with those left behind. And that night, the sisters gave him a new title among themselves, the Cardinal of Silence. In the deserts of the Middle East, where Christians live their faith with fear and courage, a young Lebanese seminarian told his spiritual director, "Now I know Rome still listens to us, because Jean-Marc Aveline, descendant of immigrants, son of the margins, shepherd of the voiceless, represented not an elite, but a memory, the memory of the Church that bleeds, that embraces, that serves." Leo XIV's decision began to be read as a new Pentecost, not because of visible miracles, but because it touched every nation according to its language, its pain, its longing for God. The language used, Tenderness, the translator. Example, while many looked at the politics of the Curia, the people of God looked at the gesture. And in that gesture they saw themselves represented. They felt heard. They felt loved. Missionaries in Mozambique said, in a letter sent to the Vatican, Jean-Marc's choice is like a candle lit at the end of the tunnel. We no longer walk alone. Rome has begun to breathe again with the lungs of the mission. Indigenous peoples of the Amazon danced in celebration after the Sunday Mass, where the local priest announced, with a rare smile, that the new right hand of the Pope was a man with the smell of sheep and feet dirty from the road. And even in the quietest monasteries of Europe, where monks dedicate their lives to invisible prayer, there was movement. During a vigil in Chartres, the monks spontaneously inserted a prayer for the new time that is dawning. They said, "Lord, bless the heart of those who love in the dark," because that was what Aveline represented. Light that does not shine to dazzle but to guide. Authority that does not impose itself by volume but by presence. Theology that does not shout truths but listens to wounds. Leo XIV's decision proved prophetic. It showed the world that the Church can still surprise, not by ideological ruptures, but by unexpected fidelity to the poor, fidelity to the word, fidelity to silence. And this spiritual revolution was not televised, it was lived. Felt in the tears of an anonymous nun, in the raised hands of a hidden catechist, in the smile of a tired priest who found new strength. That is why many began to say Aveline was not chosen. He was recognized as a sign, a reminder, a return. The Church finally turned its eyes not to centers of power, but to abandoned hearts where Christ still weeps. It was an ordinary day in Rome. The bells rang as always, the wind blew gently over St. Peter's Square. But there was a strange silence in the air. Not the silence of absence, but that of full presence. The crowds gathered for the papal audience that day didn't quite know what to expect. There were rumors, there was tension, there was also a whisper of hope that swept through the marble corridors of the Vatican like an ancient breeze, as if time itself was about to kneel down. And then he appeared. Jean-Marc Aveline walked slowly, as one who knows he is stepping on holy ground. There were no luxurious robes, no ceremonial escort, only the sound of his footsteps and a humble but determined gaze, as if carrying the weight of millions in silence in front of him. Standing at the top of the papal staircase was Leo XIV, but not as a monarch, nor as a ruler. He awaited him, with open arms, like a father, like a shepherd reuniting with the son who stayed in the outskirts. Aveline climbed the steps in silence, and when he reached the Holy Father, he did not speak. He simply fell to his knees. It was then that Leo XIV, in a gesture that will never be forgotten, also knelt. Two men, two stories, two worlds on their knees, facing each other. The square fell silent. The whole world seemed to stop. The Pope, with a trembling voice and without a microphone, said just 3 words: "Thank you for coming back." It was as if the Church was rediscovering its soul. And there, before thousands and invisibly before millions, the Pope did not hand Aveline a position. He handed him a mission. No decrees, no pomp, no coronations, just a hug, a long, tender, unhurried embrace like Christ's with Peter on the shore of Tiberias. After the denial, the cardinals watched in silence, some with tears. The faithful in the square began to spontaneously sing a prayer that many had not heard in decades. Veni, Creator. It was as if the Holy Spirit had truly been invited back to the center of the scene at that moment. The cameras captured an image that would go viral quietly. The Pope resting his head on Aveline's shoulder, eyes closed, a slight smile on his face. It was not a smile of victory. It was a smile of peace. Behind the scenes, close sources revealed that Leo XIV had prepared this moment in secret for months. He told his closest aides, "I don't just want to announce, I want to show that the Church will no longer be guided by fear, but by compassion. That our decisions will no longer be strategies, but answered prayers." And Aveline, moved, later told a small group of journalists, "I was not chosen to govern. I was reminded to serve that day." The Church was not reorganized, it was reoriented. Headlines around the world spoke of surprise, but spiritual eyes understood it was no surprise. It was providence, because that gesture, that hug, that image no longer belonged to history. They belonged to eternity. And perhaps this story was never just about Jean-Marc Aveline. Perhaps it is about me, about you, about all those who once felt forgotten, excluded, silenced by structures, but never silenced by God. Because when a pope kneels, when a hug becomes stronger than a decree, when tenderness wins over tradition, then the world understands something has changed. Leo XIV did not just surprise the world, he rekindled hope. And now, it is up to us to decide. Will we watch the change, or will we be part of it? If this message touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, so more souls may feel that faith still has a future, and that this future begins with small gestures. Like a hug, a listening, a prayer. Write in the comments, "I believe in this new path." Subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and bring this light to those who need it most.